the police department here, I do feel it's a need to sort of like go back to the history and understand like the deep, deep roots here. When it comes to the police in the United States, it goes all the way back to the foundation of our nation. It became known as the watch system and was then named the Big Stick. It was basically set up as a new era where citizens could report emergencies. The city of Boston established their own watch system in 1636. Then New York and Philadelphia did the same thing. Apparently, these organizations were of no help when it came to stopping or limiting crime. According to nationaltriallawyers.org, watchmen commonly drink or slept on the job. Very soon after, more cities began creating their own watchman systems, and corruption and cruelty were conspicuous, were essentially where corruption and cruelty were just huge and just very, very obvious in those buildings, in those offices. Reportedly, some police officers accepted bribes, hustles, gambled, and even made a way for master criminals such as robbers. They also illegally engaged in voter fraud by purchasing and stuffing ballot boxes. After the Civil War, the modern police department became more common. They were given uniforms and armed. Law enforcement in the black community began having high tensions. Prior to this, they were reportedly slave patrols, which were in charge of keeping order. So you can tell that friction there, that those high tensions, you can sort of understand those high tensions with law enforcement, given the history there. When the Civil War ended, blacks and whites were already having high tensions. So when it came to the police, mainly consisting of white men, things just got horrific. The KKK and other domestic terrorist organizations formed and they formed and they targeted black communities. They turned and they burned down black churches, schools, and they participated in lynchings of blacks. Some members of law enforcement were infiltrated by these groups and actually joined them, along with government officials. During the civil rights movement, when blacks decided to protest against segregation, racism, and other laws, the police was called in because they had the temerity to voice their opposition and condemnation of these despicable actions. And those protests turned violent, not because of the blacks, but because of law enforcement, which used fire hoses, dogs, batons, and other forms of violence to silence that opposition. These consistent violent tendencies by law enforcement played a big role in pushing and ultimately passing the Civil Rights Act of 1964. During a White House signing ceremony, President Lyndon B. Johnson delivered an influential and emotional speech. When Richard Nixon ran for president, it was on a law and order platform. And when he won, that agenda was implemented. In 1971, the administration launched a war on drugs. And instead of tackling drug issues, it led to the arrest and long prison sentences for blacks. So it was not really a war on drugs, more like a race baiting issue. Instead, Nixon's former domestic policy chief, uh, John Ehrlichman, literally later confirmed that it was an effort designed to hurt black families. He told Harper's Magazine, quote, "We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news," end quote. In 1994, as U.S. cities saw crime skyrocket, a congressional proposal by the Clinton administration became law. It was called the 1994 Crime Bill, which led to the incarceration of many blacks and led to long life sentences for drug offenses. There were some positive outcomes from that bill, but that has since been seen as one of the most negative effects of it. In 1992, after a car chase of a 25-year-old black man named Rodney King, he complied with officers and he was brutally beaten. Many thought that would lead to a conviction, but it was just the complete opposite. There was no conviction there. It was a no guilty verdict. All officers were acquitted there. That verdict by the jury enraged many, and LA went up in flames. There were peaceful gatherings, but the violence is what mostly gained national attention. And more than 2 decades down the road, some things have changed while a lot has remained the same. The police brutality is still happening, and accountability has been slow. But I will just say this one last thing here. We all know about the March on Washington and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous I Have a Dream speech, right? About him saying that I hope one day that my kids will live in a world where there is equality and they will be judged not based on the color of their skin, but they will be judged based on the content of their character, for God's sake. Some change, some equitable change in the world. Well, if you've never fully watched the speech from Dr. King, you probably have not seen this part of the speech. You probably have not seen this footage. In this part of the speech that I'm about to show you, Dr. Martin Luther King is talking about police brutality. Just watch this. Just listen.
As we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied.
Once again, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. speaking there about police brutality, words that are unfortunately still relevant 58 years later as the fight for racial justice continues. We have much more ahead tonight. Stay with us.